Bernie Sanders received an unexpected endorsement from Joe Rogan. And Sanders's detractors on the left have actually been very critical about the fact that the Sanders campaign has chosen to take this endorsement and amplify it. So in a tweet, the Bernie Sanders Twitter account wrote about the endorsement, quoting Rogan, saying, "I think I'll probably vote for Bernie. He's been insanely consistent his entire life. He's basically been saying the same thing, been for the same thing his whole life, and that in and of itself is a very powerful structure to operate from." So I think it's important for the campaign, if they are gonna amplify this endorsement, to highlight why Joe Rogan is endorsing him, because I think that's relevant to the conversation we're about to have. But they also included a video of Rogan's endorsement. They kind of turned it into a campaign ad for social media, and here's what it looked like.
Who are you gonna vote for in the primary?
I think I'll probably vote for Bernie. Him as a human being, when I was hanging out with him, and I believe in him. I like him a lot. What Bernie stands for is a guy who, well, look, you could dig up dirt on every single human being that's ever existed if you catch them in their worst moment and you magnify those moments and you cut out everything else and you only display those worst moments. That said, you can't find very many with Bernie. He's been insanely consistent his entire life. He's basically been saying the same thing, been for the same thing his whole life. And that in and of itself is a very powerful structure to operate from.
So there's his reasoning for it, and the critics are saying, look, Rogan has a problematic record of saying things about the trans community. In fact, we've talked about that on this show a little bit. He has said things about black people. There was one video that was going viral today on Twitter where he referred to going to a predominantly black neighborhood. He referred to it as Planet of the Apes. And then he immediately took it back and said that's racist. But it was still a problematic thing to say. And I hesitate to even use the word problematic. It was wrong, right? And so they're using that to kind of go after Bernie with guilt by association, and they're saying you should have amplified this endorsement. Now, I disagree with that for a number of different reasons, but before we get to my reasoning behind it, I do want to hear from you guys.
Well, those are very kind words that Joe Rogan had to say about Bernie, right? They were. That's what it is. However, Joe Rogan, problematic is an okay word to use because he's been hyper problematic. He's doubled down.
I feel like problematic doesn't go far enough in some of the cases. That's why I say I hesitate to use that word, because it doesn't really. And look, I listened to his podcast. I used to listen to it more regularly, but there are moments where I'm just like, why? Why do you do this? Because there's so many interesting conversations on that podcast, and he has these incredible moments, these moments of clarity where he speaks out against what's happening at the border with immigrants, and you're just like, yes, he gets it. But then he honestly has these blind spots, and they turn me off, and I know they turn off a lot of other people, and I understand why people find them offensive.
Right, well, I mean, as someone who is part of the LGBTQ+ community, and as I said earlier, he has doubled down on those egregious comments about trans women, trans men. I think what bothers me is how it seems like, I don't want to say Bernie's desperate for approval from young voters, because Joe Rogan has 7.9 million listeners every week, and a lot of those listeners are young, and those are the voters we want to capture for this election. We need those Gen Z, we need those millennials. So when you have someone like Bernie, who I know is a smart man, essentially aligning himself by retweeting that and not doing their homework, it does make me lose faith in Bernie, because people of the trans experience are now more than ever, they're being seen, but not seen enough. And
I agree with that. Go ahead.
But I think that Bernie's camp should absolutely try to figure out a way to make this right. I don't think if I was Bernie, I mean, I'm not running for office, so I'm probably not the right person to say this, but my opinion is you don't align yourself with someone who has anything negative or racist or transphobic or homophobic or xenophobic to say about any group of people, point blank period, especially in 2020, and with all that's transpired in the last 3 years with Me Too, Time's Up, and things of that nature. You have to, when you know better, you do better. And Bernie, I would imagine you know better.
Well, he does, and he has, I mean, look, he has a long record of standing up, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk, being politically engaged in fighting for civil rights, especially when it was unpopular to fight for the civil rights of the LGBT community. There was an article that resurfaced from, I believe, 1988, where he talked about helping the trans community within Burlington, Vermont. And so, look, if he were just some typical left-wing politician who talks about solidarity with various groups of people or civil rights with various groups of people in principle, but doesn't actually do anything, that's one thing, right? So for me, it's why did Rogan endorse him, right? If Rogan endorsed him and said, like, I think this guy hates trans people and I do too, that's an issue, right? If Bernie Sanders in any way changed his platform or his policy proposals to appeal to someone like Rogan, that's also a huge problem. But I think that after having a lengthy discussion with Sanders on his podcast, Rogan realized, hey, this guy has policies that appeal to me, and to be quite honest, appeal to the vast majority of Americans, and I'll go to some of the polling to kind of prove that point. But I just think that this is what turns me off. The thing that turns me off, and I've now experienced this firsthand, and I wish I was a little more aware of it earlier in my career. There are bad faith actors who use disenfranchised groups of people as props.
Yes.
I know that firsthand because about 2 years ago, a reporter emailed me and asked me about the environment here at TYT, okay? Would you say that Cenk Uygur has fostered a sexist environment at TYT? And so I responded back and I said, actually, Cenk has given me my voice. Like, he has given me an opportunity to share my opinions. He has allowed me to be as aggressive as I want in sharing those opinions. And he's never retaliated against me if I've disagreed with him on air, right? And so that reporter went out, published a hit piece on Cenk, did not even include my statement, didn't care.
Yes.
Totally erased my experience at this place, firsthand experience at this place. And it became more and more clear to me that there are dishonest actors who are using racial issues, gender, the LGBTQ community for their own political gain, but they never actually do anything to improve the lives of people. That's the thing that frustrates me.
Right, exactly. And it's of the ilk of liberals who don't say anything, and I think you mentioned this too, when Hillary Clinton is aligned with Henry Kissinger.
A war criminal.
No, a war criminal. And also Weinstein, she has nothing to say in terms of that relationship, or she just brushed it off like it was a casual thing that she didn't know about his quote unquote extracurricular affairs. She only knew about what was happening, but it was an open secret in Hollywood, right? So that, and I think it speaks to exactly what you were saying, which is that there are disingenuous people who are instrumentalizing this moment for their own political liberal ends. And I found this tweet, I mean, a lot of people did because it went viral, from Melina Sandieri, and she says, I'm black, trans, and a woman. I don't like Rogan, but I'm also not stupid, and I understand that he is gonna exist whether I like it or not. I'd rather have his dumb fans with us than against us. Now, can all the cis-het white neoliberals stop pretending to care about what I feel? And I think that sums it up perfectly, which is we can all not like Rogan. I don't like Rogan myself. And am I surprised that he's endorsed Bernie? Not really. He's aligned with some of the things that I've listened to Rogan off and on, that Rogan seems to find valuable. But I also, and I do think there are so many things that are problematic, given like the trans comments, the comments about black folks, and some other things that people don't like to talk about, which is that he's very much in the ilk of the Bill Maher's of the world in their exceptional anti-Muslim comments and the kind of guests that they have on that go unchallenged for their anti-Muslim rhetoric. And then one just recently resurfaced with this guy he let just drone on about talking about how the Wasabis have hijacked Islam. So he features these kind of guests and they have a huge platform. And so those are the things I don't appreciate. But can he endorse Sanders? Sure. I do have a little bit of an issue of amplifying Rogan's endorsement. And I think that's the part of the story that we're all trying to figure out why that was necessary, because Rogan already has an audience that's vast and it's expansive. So why did Bernie need to double down on that? And I would also say that I think the other thing that I kind of don't agree with Rogan, which is actually why I like Sanders, is yes, he's been consistent about his values, but when pushed to align his positions with his values, he does move. And that's what I like about Sanders, is actually he's consistent with values, but moves when people call him out and say, you know what? You say you're all for equality, but what about this and that around gender? What about this and that around race? And he's been pushed around race, and he's been pushed around Palestine, and he's moved to places that align more with his value structure. So I would say that it's also our job to make that be known to the Sanders campaign, and they'll respond adequately. I actually really like the quote from Brianna Jo
I was just gonna pull that up as
Gray.
well.
I mean,
No, go ahead. It's your birthday.
I mean, where she says, and she is the National Press Secretary, and kudos to Sanders for having a really amazing, like brilliant Black woman who occupies this position. And he actually has so many people of color who are running his campaign. And that's another part of the story that rarely gets told. So she says the goal of our campaign is to build multiracial, multi-generational movement that is large enough to defeat Donald Trump and the powerful special interests whose greed and corruption is the root cause of the outrageous inequality in America. And she goes on. I think her statements were powerful and they explained a little bit more, but I just still don't understand why his voice is being amplified.
Yeah, so I just want to make one other quick point. So I think that we need to have a broader discussion in this country, not related to any particular campaign, but just a discussion about how we're going to adapt to this new social media driven environment.
Yes.
Because the fact of the matter is, and you guys can go ahead and deny it all you want, but it's the truth. Humans are vicious little monsters, okay? And we all say things or do things that we're not proud of. And I'd like to believe that humans are also incredible and resilient in that they evolve and they learn and they change if we give them the opportunity to, right? So I'll speak from personal experience. The Armenian community was outraged that I started working here, that I was working for a Turk, that I was working for a Turk who denied the genocide, right? My family was victimized by the genocide. My great grandmother on my mother's side was made an orphan because of the Armenian genocide, and then at the age of 14 was forced to marry someone in his 30s because she had no choice. She was in an orphanage and she wanted to get out. Like, there were real consequences to that. Coming here and knowing that my boss denied that the genocide was a genocide was a hard fact to swallow, right? But I had to make a choice. And by the way, I was being paid nothing. Like, it's not like I was doing this for the money or the prestige. TYT was paying me nothing at the time. I decided to stay here because in my mind, I knew that I could be persuasive enough to convince a logical, rational person who had grown up with pro-Turkish propaganda his entire life that the genocide was in fact a genocide and it happened. I didn't cancel him. I didn't tell everybody that you shouldn't listen to this show, you shouldn't watch it, he's hopeless, there's no point. I felt that it was more important to persuade him, and if I can persuade one Turkish individual in America that this is what the truth is, then that's gonna spread. That information and that knowledge spreads. Because oftentimes the stupid comments that people make about disenfranchised groups of people, be it members of the LGBTQ community or Black people, Hispanics, whoever, right? It comes from a place of ignorance, and ignorance leads to hate. And so how do we fight that? And also, are we just gonna immediately consider people lost causes if they've said something that's offensive? I wanna have a broader discussion about that.
We should, and I don't think that he's disposable. I'm not saying that at all, and everybody will fail a purity test, I included, and anybody that's in the social media world. But I do think that there is an ongoing conversation that should be had before becoming the face, and I'm not saying he's the face of the Bernie Sanders campaign, but I think that it was a little hard to swallow given Bernie, the historic critiques around Bernie's position on race that seem to diminish the centrality of race in how the economy is structured in America. And I think that's the hard part. And of course the trans comments, and not even a but I'm just saying that other candidates who have aligned with people, comedians included, who support Andrew Yang, he hasn't been hit with, why are you aligning with an anti-trans comedian? And there is something very particular to that sort of critique. But I think that, again, Joe Rogan's a little difficult. I'm not saying he's not gonna move on his position, but is he in a place right now that represents that multi-ethnic, multi-generational movement that they want to build?
I think, Anna, your story about your experience here at TYT early on was you saw a bigger picture, right? And you said conversation. I think that, I'm not counting Joe Rogan either. I think that the silver lining, the positive is that this is someone who is polarizing, who has an audience, who has influence.
Right.
Enter someone like Bernie Sanders to possibly start a conversation about trans and LGBT marginalized groups of people. That could be a takeaway that serves the greater good, which is what you were trying to do when you came to TYT. Yeah. So I mean, I just feel like, Bernie, back to what you said, which was great. It's like, why did you feel the need to? It seemed like not a desperate move, but why to highlight that you didn't. You could do without.
I definitely don't think it was a desperate move, and he already has a giant, coalition that consists of millennials and young voters.
Yes.
I think that in amplifying, let's keep it real. Rogan's incredibly popular. He does have a giant audience, and I think that that was the appeal of Rogan in amplifying him in one of their tweets and videos. And so, look, some might disagree and think it's a bad idea to include it. It definitely led to a furious debate all over social media, but we do want to hear from you guys, and we put out a poll that you can participate in. So let's take a look. It's tyt.com/Joe Rogan, and the question is, should Bernie have amplified Joe Rogan's endorsement? You have two options there, yes or no. Participate in the poll, let us know what you think. But I do want to add a few other things. I know we're running short on time, but look, if we're gonna have very strict standards for candidates, then I want us to not have a double standard where Sanders is held to a much higher standard and everyone else it's totally fine. So there was an interesting exchange recently on Joe Rogan's podcast that I came across, and it had to do with other candidates, right? So on one hand, you have the Democratic establishment rejecting this whole Rogan endorsement, saying like, this is wrong, how dare he, you shouldn't associate with someone like him. But then at the same time, behind the scenes, this is what's going on.
They all keep asking to be on my show.
Oh, okay.
I've had requests from all of them.
Really?
Oh yeah, Biden, Warren.
How do you resist
Mayor,
that?
because I have my friends. I'd rather talk to my friends.
Yeah, I know. I get it.
Tulsi, and I like Bernie. That's it.
So look, you can't say that Sanders is like a terrible for wanting to, amplify Rogan, when in reality every single candidate is trying to go on Rogan's show to amplify themselves.
Sure.
Right.
And I didn't mean to say desperate, as if Bernie doesn't have.
No, I get what you mean.
But like, it just like back to social media, right? Yeah. I think these people that work for Sanders know the power that's inherently there with clicks and Twitter and social media. So it just seemed like they wanted to jump on that bandwagon and be a part of that movement for that moment, to have that moment. That's what I mean by desperate. But again, back to the conversation about having a conversation to push things forward. Joe Rogan, if I was a politician, I would absolutely be trying to go to the place that's gonna give me the most eyeballs, the most clicks, and the most traffic.
Yeah, exactly. But don't hold people to different standards. That's all I'm saying. The bad faith stuff is what gets under my skin the most, right? That's not to diminish what Rogan has said in the past. It's just to shine a light on the different tactics that are used by dishonest people in order to try to destroy someone's campaign. I think what matters most, it's more important than endorsements, more important than anything else, is what did that candidate stand for throughout his career?
Sure.
What has he done? Because a lot of people can talk the talk, but not many have actually done the things that they claim they want to do, or fought for the things that they claim they want to fight for.
TYT is all about challenging and disrupting the status quo, and so is Aspiration. Aspiration does not invest your money into fossil fuel businesses that harm our planet, such as pipelines and oil drilling. Instead, you'll be able to fight climate change with tools like AIM, the Aspiration Impact Measurement, and Planet Protection. They also don't hit you with outrageous fees for you to access your own money. You can even earn cash back and get free ATM uses up to 5 times a month. Head to aspiration.com/TYT to learn more. For a limited time, get 30 days of free TYT membership when you sign up.